Okay, so for provincial AMT, so in our example with the $2 million, we've got $70,000 of federal AMT. The provincial amount is going to correspond to that somewhat. So in Alberta, just a couple of examples. In Alberta, that would end up being 24,500 roughly on 70,000. So 70,000 of federal AMT equals 24,500 of Alberta AMT. BC would be 23,500 roughly. Newfoundland 40,500, and Ontario 37,000, including the regular AMT plus the surtax on the AMT. So that it really starts to add up. Like so
That's
now we're
a
at
huge
somewhere
difference,
around
though.
between the provincial AMTs.
Well, Newfoundland compared to BC is almost double in this example.
Yeah, so Newfoundland's one of the highest ones. That's why I put it in there as I think it is the highest. That's why I have it in my examples. BC might be the lowest. I can't remember. I have them all written down, but anyway, and so that those differences matter a ton, and I'll come back to that in a second. But in any case, we're at like $100,000, maybe a little below or a bit above $100,000 of AMT. So that's additional minimum tax that you're paying on your bill, on your tax bill. So on that $2 million capital gain, regular federal and provincial taxes would be about $493,000. And then if we take that's in Ontario, sorry. And then if we take AMT, that's another in Ontario, that's another $107,000. So someone planning to realize a capital gain, $2 million capital gain, and assuming a $493,000 tax bill, that would be a big whoops to realize, oh, there's another $107,000 of taxes owing. Would be quite a nasty surprise. One important detail about AMT is that it can be recovered. So you can carry forward AMT for up to 7 years, and you can use it to offset regular income that exceeds regular taxes that exceed AMT. So if you have AMT in future years, you can't carry forward your AMT. It just keeps building up. But if you have regular taxes above AMT in future years, you can soak up your AMT carry forward using those taxes. So if you have a regular tax bill in a future year, you can carry forward some of that AMT to reduce the taxes that you have owing. So you can kind of go back and mop up. It's effectively a prepayment of taxes in that case where you're actually able to go up and recover it. But there are a bunch of cases where it's not recoverable, in which case it's not a prepayment of tax, it's just a straight up extra tax. So those cases where it's not recoverable become super important, again, in this specific time period where AMT is going to be very relevant to capital gains. So one case is if there are no future years with high income within 7 years. So if you have a big $2 million capital gain now and no expectation of higher income years in the future, because remember in our $2 million capital gain example, there's no other income sources in that year, there's a good chance you won't recover all of your AMT. If you're invested in a portfolio of like stocks and bonds that's earning some income, you're at least based on my modeling, you'll recover some of your AMT, but probably not all of it, unless you have other sources of income. So that's one. And if it's a cottage, like if it's not an income producing asset that you're selling, then that wouldn't generate income like a portfolio would. So that would be even worse in that case. So that's a loss of AMT. Another one is provinces. So Mark, you mentioned earlier, there's a big difference between some of the provinces. Provincial AMT is recovered, again, as a proportion of federal AMT, but based on your current province of residence. So if you have AMT in a high rate province and then move to a low rate province, when you recover it, you lose that difference between the two provincial AMTs. Now, the same is true, like you could do some fun planning with this too. It's true in the other direction as well. So if you have AMT in a low rate province and then go recover it in a high rate province, there's a positive delta there.
So you got to move from BC to Newfoundland to get your taxes back and then move back if you so choose.
I mean, if the AMT numbers are big enough, like if it's a huge gain, maybe somebody would do it. I don't know.
People leave the country over taxes. I mean, switching provinces isn't a big deal in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah, so that's actually another point on AMT is if you have AMT and then leave Canada, that's it, because you're not going to have any future regular taxes in Canada to mop up the AMT. Another one is Quebec. If you have AMT outside of Quebec and then move into Quebec because they have a completely separate provincial AMT calculation, you lose your provincial carry forward in that case. So these are all just points where it's like, I think it highlights why it's going to be important for people to understand AMT if they're going to be thinking about realizing large capital gains this year, because it ties into all your other plans. Like, where do you live now? Where do you expect to be living in the future? I talked to somebody recently who has a large capital gain in Canada, and they wanted to know about this. Should I realize the capital gain? But they're planning on moving to a different country permanently in 2025. So in that case, they have a low income this year, so they would pay the AMT, but then they'd be gone, and that's it. So they're effectively just paying capital gains tax at a much higher rate if they do that. And
so that'd be true on exit, or what we call exit tax as well, right? Like when you become a non-resident of Canada for tax purposes, you are deemed to have disposed of your assets for tax purposes, right? So if you have a large capital gain and you are becoming a non-resident, it's the act of leaving can trigger the capital gain, but now you have no way of recovering it, right? So exit tax, I guess, could in theory be a lot higher because you can't recover the AMT if you're leaving.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I think that I don't know why it would be different on exit tax, but assuming that is correct, that is a very good point for anyone saying, I'm out of here. Canada's increasing the gains, but I'm leaving. Well,
gotcha.
Yeah, that's seriously. So we talked about the break-even numbers earlier. There's 7 or 8 years that we kind of found in that example as a break-even. The AMT, I won't throw a number out there because it varies a ton based on the assumptions, but AMT really changes this math, especially if it's someone who has low other sources of income. Like in the example we've been talking about with the $2 million gain and no other sources of income, because they won't mop up that AMT, it really messes up the break-even calculation to the point where it's like it's pretty unlikely that you'd actually want to sell the asset.
And sorry to be clear, Ben, all of this math that you've just walked us through is before any of the budget changes. So it's using the 50% inclusion rate on capital gains as well as the current AMT rules, right?
Yeah. So once the gains rate, the gains inclusion rate, or if the gains inclusion rate increases to 2/3, as is proposed, the AMT on capital gains specifically, you could still make AMT appear, but on, like in this example for the $2 million example, AMT is lower than regular taxes at a 2/3 inclusion rate. So
interesting.
Yeah, that's why, again, like AMT is having a moment. It's this specific set of circumstances right now that make AMT particularly important.
So the lower your income, the less concerned you are with, in general, with the proposed tax changes.
Well, yeah. I mean, in general, that's true, especially if you're not going to realize capital gains.
No, if you're realizing a big capital gain because of the AMT calculation.
Well, if your income is lower, I mean, you'll still pay less tax overall, I guess, if you have a lower income, but that's when AMT will be triggered. If you have low other sources of income and a large capital gain, that's when your AMT tax is going to exceed your regular tax. If you have a higher income, your regular tax is going to be higher overall, so AMT is not going to be an issue.
And this is calculated based on, like, let's say this gets implemented, the budget, and you do sell all these assets today. The AMT calculation that you would actually use for the 2024 tax year, do you know if it would be the new AMT rules or the old ones? Like, because you're triggering the gain prior to the AMT taking effect, but the AMT calculation would be done when you go to do your taxes the following year. So I don't know if you know the answer. It just occurred to me that I don't know if they're going to use the new AMT calculation for gains that are triggered before June 25th.
That I do not know the answer
That's
to.
a good question.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff where, like, I'm unsure if that's something that I don't know or if it's something that nobody knows yet. I don't know.
It's possible, I guess. I'm just wondering if the higher exemption under the new AMT there, so you're getting capital gains under the old inclusion rate, but potentially AMT calculations on the new AMT rate with the higher exemption. I don't know.
So my examples were based on the proposed AMT rules with the 173,205 exemption and the higher rate on the net AMT income.
Okay, so just so I'm crystal clear, you're using the 50% inclusion rate today on this capital gain example.
Yep.
But you're using the new proposed AMT rules. Is that right?
Yep, correct.
Got it.
Because if if like the budget proposes this new capital gains rate, but after June 25th, and then it proposes the new AMT for the tax year 2024. So I think looking at it this way does make sense. Happy to be corrected on that if someone with more tax expertise thinks otherwise.